The scent was the first thing that anchored me. It was a complex perfume of damp earth after a morning rain, the sharp, clean fragrance of pine needles, and the subtle, metallic tang of fresh water. It was the precise scent of my childhood summers. A sensory ghost I had spent 2 decades and a small fortune chasing. After a career walled inside sterile, climate-controlled offices, navigating labyrinths of fluorescent lights and the hushed, venomous whispers of deposition rooms, this small house on the edge of Serenity Lake was more than a home. It was a sanctuary. It was meant to be the epilogue, the chapter where the weary protagonist finally lays down his sword and learns the quiet art of watching the sunset. The property was a peculiarity, a relic from an era before the surgical precision of planned communities and their endless covenants. It was a single, deep lot carved out in the 1960s, featuring a modest but sturdy stone and cedar house and its crown jewel, 50 feet of private, unspoiled lakefront. The vast tract of land that now cupped my property had been developed in the late 90s into Willow Creek Estates, a sprawling collection of beige McMansions with lawns so uniformly green they looked like they'd been rendered by a computer. My property was an island, a geographical and legal anomaly that predated their entire meticulously planned existence. I was not part of their homeowners association, a fact confirmed by the title search, laser-etched into my deed, and clearly delineated on the county plat maps I had studied with the same obsessive focus I once reserved for evidence boards. This legal distinction was to be the very bedrock of my new, peaceful life. Or so I had naively believed. I had been in residence for exactly 3 days. The last of the moving boxes stood flattened in a neat stack, and I was on my weathered wooden dock, a relic from the original owner, that I'd already grown to love, a steaming mug of black coffee warming my hands. The morning mist was receding from the lake like a slow curtain, revealing a surface of hammered silver. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the old pylons and the mournful, beautiful cry of a distant loon. This was it. This was the silence I had paid for, not just with money, but with years of my life I could never get back. Then, a new sound intruded, sharp and alien in the morning calm, the rhythmic, aggressive crunching of gravel. I turned my head, squinting against the strengthening sun. A woman was marching down my long driveway, her posture as rigid and purposeful as a drill sergeant on parade. She wore a blindingly white tennis skirt, a turquoise polo shirt with the collar popped, and a visor that seemed to surgically attach a perfectly coiffed blonde bob to her skull. In one hand, she clutched a thick, 3-ring binder like a holy text. I sighed, the spell of tranquility shattering into 1,000 pieces. I stood up, brushed the sawdust from my jeans, and walked up the gentle slope of my lawn to meet this emissary of the new world. As I drew closer, I could see the fine lines of perpetual disapproval etched around her mouth, a familiar sight. I'd seen that same expression on the faces of mob wives who felt their husbands' illicit empires entitled them to cut the line at the grocery store. "Good morning," I said, offering a neutral, non-committal smile. She stopped about 5 feet from me, her eyes conducting a rapid, critical inventory of my property. They lingered on the patch of wild clover I'd intentionally left for the bees, the slightly peeling paint on a northern window frame, and the unapologetically old-fashioned fishing boat I had tethered to the dock. "I'm Carol Donaldson," she announced, her voice as crisp and sterile as a new set of legal briefs. She did not offer a hand. "I'm the president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association." "Ethan Hayes," I replied. "Nice to meet you. I just moved in." "I'm aware," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the binder's cover. The plastic was emblazoned with a gold foil logo of a weeping willow draping itself over a placid lake. "I'm here to welcome you to the community and to get you set up with your HOA dues and a copy of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. We have a welcome basket for you. Of course, once the paperwork is sorted." It sounded less like a welcome and more like a shakedown. I kept my smile fixed in place, though it felt like a poorly constructed mask. "I appreciate the thought, Carol, but there must be a misunderstanding. My property isn't part of the Willow Creek HOA." Her own smile, a thin, bloodless slash across her face, didn't waver, but her eyes hardened with a familiar glint of entitled disbelief. "I think you'll find that it is. All properties with lake access are required to be members. It's for the preservation of our community's primary asset, the lake itself." She patted the binder with a proprietary air. "We all contribute to the upkeep. The new community dock, the landscaping, the water quality testing. It's all in here." I had prepared for this conversation, hoped it would be unnecessary. But I had long ago learned that hope is not a strategy. I'm afraid my deed and the official county records state otherwise. This lot, number 72B, was sectioned off 30 years before the Willow Creek development was even zoned. It was specifically and legally excluded from the master plan. Her condescending smile finally faltered, replaced by a flicker of raw annoyance. It was as if I'd patiently explained a point of law only to have her dismiss it as irrelevant noise. That sounds like something a realtor would say to close a sale. But the reality, Mr. Hayes, is that we are the sole governing body for this lakefront. Your property is contiguous with ours. You benefit from the property values we maintain. You benefit from the water quality we pay for. You cannot simply opt out of community responsibility." "It's not a matter of opting out," I said, my voice remaining even, a practiced calm I had spent years cultivating. "It's a matter of legal boundaries. I was never opted in. My property has no legal connection to your association." With a sharp snap of the rings that echoed in the quiet morning air, she opened her binder. She flipped to a tabbed section, running a finger down a list, as if it were a sacred scroll. "I see no record of an exemption for 72B. The annual dues are $1,200, plus a one-time special assessment of $5,000 for the lake revitalization project we completed last year. You can make the checkout to Willow Creek Estates HOA." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was almost impressive. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a willful disregard for reality, an assertion of power based on nothing more than the heft of her binder and the force of her personality. She was creating her own jurisdiction. "Carol," I said, letting a bit of the weariness I genuinely felt creep into my tone, "I'm not going to argue with you. I am telling you, as a matter of legal fact, that I am not a member of your HOA, and I will not be paying any dues or assessments. I'm happy to be a good neighbor, but I will not be governed by your association's bylaws." The mask of strained civility disintegrated. Her jaw tightened, and a blotchy red flush crept up her neck from the collar of her polo shirt. "We'll see about that," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This community has standards. We don't tolerate freeloaders. You'll find that not being part of the team has consequences, Mr. Hayes. Significant consequences." She slammed the binder shut, turned on her heel, and marched back up my driveway, her tennis shoes crunching on the gravel like grinding teeth. I stood there for a long moment, the coffee in my mug now cold. The loon called out again, but this time its cry sounded less like a celebration of wild freedom and more like a warning siren. The peace I had so desperately sought had lasted less than 72 hours. The sword I thought I had laid to rest was stirring in my hand, and it seemed someone was already insistent on testing its edge. The first volley in Carol Donaldson's war of attrition arrived a week later, not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of official-looking paper. Tucked neatly under the red flag of my mailbox was a crisp, cream-colored envelope. My name and address were printed in a severe, all-caps font that screamed bureaucratic seriousness. Inside, on heavy cardstock, bearing the golden willow logo, was my first violation notice. I read it while leaning against the warm stone of my house, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of honeysuckle. The notice listed 3 infractions, each with a corresponding fine. First, non-conforming mailbox. Fine, $50. My classic, forest green mailbox, which was in perfect working order, apparently violated Article 4, Section 2A of the bylaws, which mandated all mailboxes be a specific shade of beige called lakeside taupe. Second, unapproved fencing material. Fine $100. The charming, weathered split-rail fence that marked my property line was deemed non-compliant. The bylaws required 6-foot white vinyl privacy fences. Third, and my personal favorite, excessive lawn diversity. Fine $25. This was in reference to the small patch of clover I was cultivating near the driveway. All lawns, the notice sternly informed me, must consist of a monoculture of approved fescue or Kentucky bluegrass. I almost laughed. It was so petty, so absurdly tyrannical, that it bordered on parody. But the humor faded as I recognized the strategy. This wasn't about bylaws. It was about establishing a pattern of harassment. It was a classic pressure tactic I'd seen used by slumlords and racketeers, overwhelm the target with a relentless stream of minor, often baseless, infractions until they either capitulate from exhaustion or break a real law in frustration. Carol wasn't enforcing rules. She was trying to establish dominance over a territory she believed was hers. My first instinct, the weary man who just wanted peace, was to ignore it, to treat it with the contempt it deserved. But the prosecutor in me, the part that knew how these things worked, immediately overruled that impulse. Never let an accusation, no matter how frivolous, go unanswered. An unanswered charge festers. In the minds of observers, and sometimes even in court, it can become a tacit admission of guilt. More importantly, I needed to start a paper trail. A clear, documented record of communication is the most powerful weapon in any dispute. I went inside to my small home office, a room that still smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. I powered on my laptop and began to compose a response. It wasn't an angry email or a scrawled note. I drafted a formal letter, using the precise, dispassionate language that had been my sword and shield for 15 years. I began by referencing her correspondence of that date. I then stated, clearly and unequivocally, as previously discussed during our conversation on date, the property located at my address, parcel ID 72B, is not, and has never been, a part of the Willow Creek Estates development, nor subject to its covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I addressed each of her violations in turn, citing the specific paragraph in my deed that legally described the property's boundaries. I attached a high-resolution scan of the county plat map, on which I'd used a graphics program to highlight my lot in yellow and the HOA's territory in blue, showing the clear and distinct separation. I pointed out that my property predated her association by several decades and was therefore grandfathered out of any subsequent community regulations. I concluded the letter with a firm but polite statement. Therefore, the violation notices and the associated fines are legally void and without merit. Please cease and desist from any further attempts to enforce your association's bylaws on my private property. I consider this matter closed. I printed 2 copies, one for my files, which I placed in a new manila folder labeled Donaldson, C, HOA, the other, along with the copies of the deed and map, I placed in a business envelope. I didn't just drop it in her mailbox. I drove to the post office and sent it via certified mail with a return receipt requested. It was a habit drilled into me during a particularly nasty case against a fraudulent charity. The entire case had hinged on proving the CEO, a slippery character, had received a specific warning letter. We won because of a little green certified mail receipt. It cost an extra $7, but it was an irrefutable piece of evidence. It transformed a piece of paper into a legal fact. It was a small, deliberate action, a signal that I was not some pushover who could be intimidated by fancy stationery. For about 2 weeks, a blessed, deceptive silence descended. I saw Carol's luxury SUV drive past my house a few times, slowing unnaturally, and I felt her gaze on me as I worked in my yard. But there were no more letters. I allowed myself a sliver of hope that my formal, legally sound response had been enough. Perhaps she had consulted with an actual lawyer who had explained the futility and liability of her position. That hope was obliterated on a Saturday morning. I went to retrieve my mail and found another cream-colored envelope. This one wasn't in the mailbox. It was taped to the front of it. Inside was not a formal notice, but a handwritten note on a piece of stationery embossed with a large, gaudy D. The handwriting was an aggressive, slanted script. "Mr. Hayes," it read, "your legal mumbo-jumbo is meaningless. We are a community of laws. You will abide by them. The fines have now doubled due to non-payment. This is your final warning before we place a lien on your property." Below her signature, she had scrawled a P.S. "Your mailbox is still not taupe." The lien threat was an empty one, legally impossible without a judgment. But it was a clear escalation. She had received my evidence, understood my position, and had chosen to discard it entirely. She was operating purely on ego. I carefully removed the tape from my mailbox, folded the note, and placed it in the Donaldson seed file, right behind the green certified mail receipt she had signed. The paper trail was growing, and as I closed the file drawer, a cold, familiar feeling settled in my gut. It was the feeling I used to get right before a long, difficult trial. The feeling of methodical preparation, of laying the foundation, brick by evidentiary brick, for a structure of unassailable truth that would eventually bring a corrupt edifice crashing down. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She saw a quiet man who wanted to be left alone. She couldn't see the architect of ruin hiding just behind his eyes. The transition from paper threats to physical action was as subtle as it was unsettling. It began with the grass. One morning, I noticed a strange, sickly, yellow-brown streak running along the outside of my split-rail fence. A dead scar, about 6 inches wide, stretching the entire length of my property line, bordering the street. It was a perfectly straight line, the kind you couldn't make by accident. It brought back a flash of memory from an old witness intimidation case. A federal witness, a tough old longshoreman, had been rattled not by a physical threat, but by finding his wife's prize-winning rose bushes mysteriously withered overnight, poisoned at the root. It was a signal, a way of saying, "We can touch what you love." Someone had walked my perimeter with a canister of powerful herbicide, delivering the same message. It was deniable, of course, but it was a clear escalation, a move from administrative harassment to minor property crime. My jaw tightened as I surveyed the damage. This was vandalism. I felt a surge of hot, visceral anger, the primal instinct to march over to her house and have it out. But I choked it down. forcing the emotion into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. A public confrontation was exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to yell, to lose my temper, to give her ammunition to paint me as the unhinged, aggressive neighbor. My training, my entire professional life, had been about subduing that instinct. Emotion was a liability. The correct response was not outrage, but data, evidence. That afternoon, I didn't call a lawn care company. I drove to a specialty electronics store, bypassing the consumer-grade security kits near the entrance. I went to the back, where they kept the professional components. I spent 2 hours consulting with a tech, discussing lens angles, low-light performance, and data storage. I thought about the principles of evidence collection I'd learned from FBI technical agents. You don't just point a camera. You anticipate the defense. You create overlapping fields of fire to eliminate blind spots. You ensure the resolution is high enough for facial identification. You capture audio, because a clear threat is worth 1,000 blurry pictures. I bought 4 high-resolution, low-light, weatherproof cameras, a network video recorder with a 4 terabyte hard drive, and several spools of shielded Cat6 cable. It was overkill for a simple home security setup. But I wasn't deterring burglars. I was building an evidentiary net. The next 2 days were spent on a ladder tucked under the eaves of my house. I placed one camera with a tight shot on my mailbox and the street in front of it. Another was aimed along the fence line where the grass had been killed. A third watched over my backyard and dock. The fourth, a wider angle lens, covered the approach to my front porch. I ran the cables through the attic, dropping them down inside a closet wall to the network recorder in my office. I configured the system to record continuously on motion detection and to upload encrypted copies of all motion-triggered events to a secure cloud server. I remembered a case against a smuggling ring that fell apart because the defendants destroyed the local surveillance tapes. The agent in charge had taught me a lesson. If the evidence only exists in one place, it doesn't exist at all. My evidence would exist in the cloud, untouchable. A week after the cameras were installed, the next incident occurred. I went out one morning to find the flag on my mailbox, my non-compliant, forest green mailbox, gone. It hadn't just fallen off. It had been snapped clean off at the hinge. The metal twisted and broken. Another petty act. But this time, it was not unseen. I went straight to my office, my heart beating with a mix of anger and grim satisfaction. I opened the NVR software and scrolled back through the timeline. At 2:17 a.m., a dark sedan, consistent with Carol's husband Bob's car, drove slowly past. It turned around at the end of the cul-de-sac and stopped. The passenger side door opened, the dome light conveniently disabled. A figure in a dark hoodie got out. They moved quickly to the mailbox. There was a sharp, wrenching motion, and the camera's sensitive microphone picked up the distinct snap of metal. The figure jogged back to the car, and it drove away. I watched it 3 times. The face was hidden, but the person's build was slight, and on their left wrist, for a brief second as they reached for the flag, a collection of chunky bracelets caught the camera's infrared light, glittering brightly. The same bracelets I'd seen on Carol Donaldson's wrist during our first meeting. I saved the clip, exported it, and uploaded it to the cloud, labeling it Vandalism Mailbox. I didn't call the police. Not yet. A single act of petty vandalism from an unidentifiable person wouldn't lead to anything. It was one brick. My job was to keep laying them. The rage I felt was now ice cold. People like Carol thrive because good people get worn down by the sheer, grinding pettiness of it all. They give in because it's easier. I had spent my career fighting bullies who operated on a grander scale. But I knew the soul of a tyrant is the same, whether they're in a presidential palace or a homeowners association. I bought a new, Even nicer, forest green mailbox. A heavy-duty steel one. As I installed it, I felt Carol's eyes on me from her window across the street. I didn't look over. I didn't acknowledge her. I just calmly and deliberately replaced the broken piece of my property. A silent declaration that I would not be worn down. I would not bend. I would simply document, gather, and wait. Her arrogance would be her undoing. She thought she was delivering warnings. In reality, she was just methodically building my case for me. With direct vandalism failing to elicit the desired response, Carol shifted her tactics to a new, more insidious front. My reputation. She decided that if she couldn't force me out with fines or intimidate me with petty property damage, she would socially isolate me, turning me into a pariah. Her weapon of choice was the modern-day town square of suburban warfare, the private neighborhood Facebook group. The group was called Willow Creek Neighbors, and it was a nauseatingly saccharine mix of posts about lost cats and plumbers. It was also Carol's personal propaganda machine. I had been granted access during my first week, and now I began monitoring it daily. The first post was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a friendly reminder about how the community's beauty was a team effort. It was a public shaming designed to pressure me. It reminded me of a defense attorney I'd once faced who would leak subtle, misleading information to the press to try and poison the jury pool before a trial even began. The tactic was the same: control the narrative, isolate the target. When that failed to get a rise out of me, she escalated. A few days later, a new post appeared. This one included a photograph, a grainy, zoomed-in picture of my small, natural shoreline, with its native grasses and cattails. Next to it, she posted a photo of the HOA's beach, a sterile stretch of trucked-in white sand. Concerned neighbor alert. The post began, in all caps. She called my shoreline an eyesore, a blight, and a safety hazard that could attract snakes, rodents, and other vermin. The comment section exploded with manufactured outrage. "That's disgusting. I won't let my kids swim anywhere near that. Thank you for being on top of this. Carol, that's unacceptable." The poison was working. The next day, a neighbor who had previously been friendly averted his eyes and crossed the street to avoid me. The temptation to log in and fight back was immense. I could post the deed, the plat map, a detailed explanation of riparian rights, but arguing with a mob on the internet was a fool's errand. It would only devolve into a name-calling sludgefest, and Carol would use my angry responses as proof of my instability. My silence was a more powerful strategy. Instead, I documented. I took meticulous screenshots of every post and every comment, saving them in a new subfolder titled Defamation. Carol, in her blind arrogance, believed she was building a wall of public opinion to corner me. She had no idea that she was actually building the walls of my prosecution, providing a clear, time-stamped record of a coordinated campaign of public slander. The crucial piece of evidence came from the photo she'd posted. It was taken from a very specific angle at the end of the community doc. I downloaded the image file and opened it not in a simple viewer, but in a program designed to analyze file metadata. Most of the data was stripped by Facebook, but not all. The key was the reflection. In the dark water at the bottom of the frame was a faint, distorted reflection of the person taking the picture. I remembered a case involving encrypted files on a suspect's computer. We brought in a forensic imaging specialist from the FBI lab at Quantico, who showed me how much information could be pulled from a seemingly corrupted image. He taught me about pixel density, light refraction, and digital noise, using some of the techniques he'd shown me: isolating the reflection, sharpening the pixels, adjusting the chromatic aberration. I was able to clarify the distorted image. It became a clear shape, A figure with a blonde bob, wearing a turquoise shirt. It was circumstantial, but it placed her at the scene, taking the very photo used to slander me. I saved the enhanced image, labeling it Exhibit A, slander photo. The case against her was getting stronger with every move she made. Having failed to intimidate me with property damage or isolate me with public slander, Carol moved on to the next stage in the playbook of petty tyrants. She decided to weaponize the government against me. It was a classic and often effective strategy. Drown your target in bureaucracy until they either give up or make a mistake. The first salvo came from city code enforcement. A man in a khaki uniform with a tired expression arrived to inspect my unpermitted dock. He'd clearly been down this road before. "Let me guess," he sighed, after I calmly explained the dock was grandfathered in. "The president's name is Carol." He left me with a no violations found notice, which went straight into my file. I knew from experience that having a record of unfounded complaints made by a specific individual was invaluable in proving a pattern of harassment. Each official visit was another entry in my log. 2 days later, animal control arrived, responding to a complaint about a vicious Rottweiler that was a menace to the neighborhood children. I don't own a dog. The young officer was apologetic as she filed her baseless report. This was a nastier tactic. Inventing a vicious dog was designed to paint me as a danger. It was also incredibly sloppy. The lie was too easily disproven. And in doing so, she was creating an official record of her maliciousness. The final official visit came a week later, and it was the most serious. A sheriff's department cruiser. A deputy, a tall man with a calm demeanor and observant eyes, met me at the door for a wellness check. A neighbor, he said, had reported shouting, strange noises at night, and was worried about my welfare. My blood ran cold. This was a particularly venomous tactic, designed to create a file with my name on it suggesting mental instability. "Deputy," I said, my voice perfectly level, a practiced tone I had used with countless officers. "I live alone, and my nights are completely quiet. There is, however, an ongoing dispute with the head of the local HOA. I consciously chose not to flood him with my story. My training was to be the calm, rational party, and let the authorities connect the dots." His eyes sharpened. The HOA president wouldn't be a Mrs. Carol Donaldson, by any chance. I simply nodded. He relaxed slightly, and a hint of a wry smile touched his lips. He conducted a professional, respectful tour of my home and concluded, "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Hayes." As he left, he added, "Between you and me, sir, when we get a call from this neighborhood and the complainant's name is withheld, but the complaint itself sounds personal, it's usually Mrs. Donaldson." He left, and I stood there with the 3 official reports in my mind: code enforcement, no violation, animal control, baseless, sheriff's department, unfounded. Carol thought she was using the system to break me. Instead, I was using her attacks to build my shield. Each time she sent a government agent to my door, that agent left as a potential witness in my favor, creating an unimpeachable, third-party record of her obsessive harassment. The file in my office was getting heavy. The day of reckoning was getting closer. The final escalation, the one that stripped away all pretense of neighborhood disputes, came on a sweltering Tuesday evening. The sun had just dipped below the tree line, painting the lake in hues of orange and violet. I was in my kitchen when the motion sensor for my driveway camera pinged my phone. I glanced at the screen and saw a beat-up, dark blue pickup truck with a rusted-out fender pull to a stop at my closed gate. It was an alien vehicle in this sanitized suburban landscape. 2 men got out. They were not my neighbors. The driver was a mountain of a man, with a thick neck and arms covered in faded prison-style tattoos. The passenger was smaller, wiry, with nervous, darting eyes. They looked like the kind of low-level muscle you could hire for $100 and a case of beer. My heart, which had remained steady, began to beat a little faster. This was different. This was a physical threat. I watched them on my phone for a moment, my mind racing, analyzing. They rattled the gate. Amateurs. I walked to the front door, flipped the switch for the powerful LED floodlight that illuminated the entire gate area, and stepped out onto my porch. The sudden, brilliant light made them flinch. "Can I help you?" I called out, my voice calm, projecting easily. The big one swaggered forward. "You Ethan Hayes," he grunted. "I am." "We got a message for you," the wiry one chirped. "From Carol, the president." "I'm familiar with her," I said dryly. "Yeah. Well," the big one continued, grabbing the gate's bars. "She's real unhappy. She wants you to join her club. She wants you to pay up for that pretty lake you're enjoying. $5,000, she said, plus the annual fee. You're gonna pay it. Tonight." Extortion. It was a beautiful, clear-cut textbook example. I felt a strange sense of professional detachment settle over me. The fear was there, a low thrum beneath the surface, but the prosecutor was in control. My mind flashed to a memory sitting in a cold interrogation room across from a cartel enforcer. A man with dead eyes who had calmly described acts of violence that would make these two clowns run screaming. This was amateur hour. I let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a laugh of mirth. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You think this is funny?" the big one roared, his face darkening with rage. "We ain't asking you pay up, or we're gonna have a real problem. Maybe that old boat of yours goes for a swim at the bottom of the lake. Maybe your pretty windows get broken. You understand me?" I let the threat hang in the air, ensuring the camera's microphone captured every word. Then, I took a deliberate step forward. "Let me make sure I understand," I said, my voice dropping into a lower, colder register. The cross-examination voice. "You are on my private property. You are attempting to extort money from me on behalf of Carol Donaldson. And you are making direct, criminal threats against my property." I pointed a finger directly at the camera on the eave. "And you are doing it all on a high-definition, audio-enabled camera system that is currently streaming this entire conversation to a secure off-site server." I saw the flicker of panic in the wiry one's eyes. "I'm locking my front door now," I said, my voice as flat and final as a judge's gavel. "And then, I'm calling the police to report 2 men trespassing and making criminal threats. The sheriff's station is less than 10 minutes from here. I'd imagine your description is already being logged by the dispatcher. I suggest you leave before they arrive." Without another word, I turned my back on them, walked inside, and shot the deadbolt with a loud, definitive thump. I dialed 911, my hands perfectly steady. Through the window, I watched them scramble back into their truck and squeal away. This was the last brick. Carol had overplayed her hand so dramatically, so catastrophically, that it was almost beautiful. She had graduated from petty harassment to felony conspiracy to commit extortion. She had just handed me the sword, the shield, and the executioner's axe. The time for patient documentation was over. The time for action was here. The stage for the final act was set at an emergency community meeting 2 days later. The email blast was hysterical, urgent meeting to discuss the threat to our community's safety. The sole agenda item was me. Carol had even sent me a special, gloatingly formal invitation. She was summoning me to my own public execution at the community clubhouse, her seat of power. It was exactly what I wanted. I arrived precisely on time, carrying a slim, black laptop bag. The room was packed. A sea of pastel polo shirts and concerned faces Carol had expertly whipped into a frenzy. I walked to an empty chair in the front row and sat down. Carol stood at a lectern, flanked by her board. She was dressed in a crisp white pantsuit, projecting an air of righteous indignation. She launched into a masterful performance of half-truths and outright lies, painting me as a hostile outsider terrorizing their peaceful community. She listed my violations, my refusal to cooperate, and my arrogant dismissal of community standards. And now, his aggression has escalated, she declared, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. 2 nights ago, 2 concerned community members, brave young men, attempted to speak with Mr. Hayes, to reason with him. And how was their peaceful outreach met? He threatened them. He called the police and filed a false report. Outrage rippled through the room. She had them completely. The board proposes an immediate special assessment of $20,000 to retain a top litigation firm and file a lawsuit to force this man to comply or sell his property. A forest of hands shot up in favor. Carol's smile was blinding. She looked at me, her eyes glittering with triumph. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" "I do," I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly. I stood up, walked to the front, and opened my laptop bag. "If I may have a moment to use the projector." Confused, but supremely confident, Carol sneered. "Very well. Let's hear your excuses." I calmly connected my laptop. The large screen behind her, which had displayed the HOA logo, now showed my desktop. "My name is Ethan Hayes," I began, turning to the audience. "And I'm not here to offer excuses. I'm here to present facts." My first click brought up the annotated plat map. "Fact: my property is legally separate from your association." Click. The certified mail receipt with her signature. "Fact: your president was formally notified and chose to ignore the law." Click. The video of the hooded figure snapping my mailbox flag. I zoomed in on the bracelets. A gasp went through the room. "Fact: my property has been repeatedly vandalized." Click. A montage of her Facebook posts. "Fact: I have been the target of a coordinated campaign of public slander." Click. The official reports from code enforcement, animal control, and the sheriff's department, each one marked "no violation," "baseless," or "unfounded." Fact: Mrs. Donaldson has repeatedly misused civic resources to harass me. The room was now utterly silent, the mood shifting from self-righteous anger to shocked confusion. "And now," I said, my voice turning to ice, "let's talk about the 2 fine young men." I played the final video. The image was perfectly clear, the audio pristine. The entire room watched the thugs, heard the threats, heard Carol's name invoked. They saw her extortion plot laid bare. Carol's face had gone from triumphant pink to a ghastly fish-belly white. I paused the video on a perfect, clear shot of the 2 men's faces. "That man on the right," I said, pointing, "is Daniel Petrovich, Carol's nephew. He has 2 prior convictions for assault." Finally, I closed the video. The screen went dark. I let the silence hang for a moment longer. Then I turned to face the stunned crowd and delivered the confirmation of everything they had just witnessed. For 15 years, before I retired and moved here seeking peace, I said, my voice resonating with an authority they had never heard before. I was an assistant United States attorney for the Department of Justice. My specialty was prosecuting organized crime under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the RICO Act. I turned my gaze directly on the paralyzed, sweating form of Carol Donaldson. RICO is a law designed to dismantle criminal enterprises that use a pattern of illegal activities like mail fraud, extortion, witness tampering, and threats of violence to maintain power. And, Mrs. Donaldson, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet, what I have just presented to you all is not a neighborhood dispute. It is a textbook pattern of racketeering activity. You have used the HOA as your enterprise to engage in a campaign of harassment, vandalism, libel, and conspiracy to commit extortion, all documented, all recorded, all preserved as evidence. This meeting is over. The reveal wasn't a shock. It was the final, devastating puzzle piece clicking into place. It explained the meticulous documentation, the professional-grade cameras, the legal letters, the calm demeanor, the analysis of the photo, the fearlessness in the face of thugs. It was the logical conclusion to the investigation they had just watched unfold. Carol stared at me, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have stolen the very air from her lungs. She wasn't looking at her quiet, annoying neighbor anymore. She was looking at the man who had just, with calm and meticulous precision, ended her entire world. The aftermath was swift and brutally efficient. In the stunned silence, 2 sheriff's deputies walked through the back door. I had informed them before the meeting of the extortion attempt, and that the subjects would be present. They walked directly to Carol's nephew and placed him under arrest. Carol's reign was over. Facing criminal charges and a massive civil lawsuit, she and her husband sold their house at a loss and vanished. The entire HOA board resigned in disgrace, issuing a public apology. Carol pleaded guilty to lesser charges, but the court-ordered restitution and the settlement from my civil suit were financially crippling. With the tyrant gone, the atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates changed. A new board was formed, led by a soft-spoken retired teacher. Their first act was to draft a formal apology to me. Their second was to review and gut the ridiculous bylaws. The Lakeside Taupe mailbox mandate was the first to go. The community began to heal. Neighbors who had shunned me now approached, embarrassed and apologetic. I accepted graciously. All I had ever wanted was peace. And in the end, I found it. The following spring, I sat on my old wooden dock, a fishing line trailing in the water. Across the lake, a neighbor drifted by in his canoe and gave me a friendly wave. I waved back. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and clean water. The silence was broken only by the lapping of the lake and the distant cry of a loon. It was the sound of a well-earned victory. The sword was finally, truly, laid down.